So next we're going to hear from someone who really needs no introduction. Lord Alf Dubs, the Labour peer, came here as a child on the Kindertransport, as a child refugee, has been a long-term campaigner for the plight of refugees, particularly focusing on children who flee alone, seeking safety in Europe and the UK. I think Alf is well known throughout the country and throughout the wider movement campaigning for refugee rights.
Lord Dubs, thank you so much for agreeing to speak to us at the launch of the campaign. I could not think of anyone who could be better qualified to speak on why this campaign is important and why European governments need to show humanity in the way they respond to refugees and people seeking asylum. And so I wanted to hear from you, what do you think is needed to bring about change in the way European governments are responding to refugees today?
Thank you very much, Need, for inviting me to take part. I think the difficulty is that many European countries are now seeing extreme right-wing political parties campaigning against asylum seekers and refugees. It's a sad comment on European countries, and indeed in Germany there was some meeting recently, and fortunately there were very powerful demonstrations against the outcome of that. Nevertheless, the extreme right-wing parties are having, unfortunately, some electoral successes. I think there are two things that would enable us to change our policies, or that would be a precondition. One is political leadership. We have unfortunately had a Home Secretary, previous one, who talked about asylum seekers coming to Britain as being invaders. The hostile language to asylum seekers makes it very much more difficult for local communities to be supportive when political leaders are expressing hostility and saying these people shouldn't be here at all. To call people invaders and other abusive terms seems to me to designate them as an enemy. So what we need is political leadership which is more sympathetic to asylum seekers and refugees, because then that sympathy will also work its way down to local communities. And the second part of the equation is this, that I think if we're going to be welcoming to refugees, then I think local communities will have a key part to play in making people welcome. And above all, what we need is public opinion, which is more sympathetic to the cause of refugees, public opinion which actually understands what we mean by the United Nations Geneva Convention and other humanitarian principles. And if public opinion is aware of that, and if public opinion is aware of what asylum seekers have been through in their own countries, which made it inevitable they'd have to flee for safety, public opinion understands that better, then there is more sympathy for the issue. So we need that sympathy both at a local level and at a national level. It's quite a long answer, but it's a very difficult issue you've raised, and it is very sad that across Europe we're seeing this hostility on the part of political parties that are winning votes through such a cynical attempt to get public opinion on their side. We've got to get public opinion on our side and argue that public opinion is actually capable of being humanitarian, of being humane. We've got to get that public opinion mobilized in that way by saying, of course, we need Europe-wide cooperation on this. It's no good different European countries having different policies, and the best way forward is to have proper cooperation across European countries, even including Britain, which is not sadly in the EU anymore, proper cooperation in order that we can move forward together.
Thank you for already addressing one of the things that we point out, which is that we have these developments taking place in parallel in Germany and the UK and other countries. And we have groups and organizations from across Europe joining us as part of this campaign. And some of people will be watching from across Europe and also North Africa online during the launch of the campaign. A lot of them have been working for refugee rights for years, and many are feeling frustrated or disheartened at the lack of progress and even the rollback on refugee rights that we've been seeing. So I wanted to ask you whether you maybe have some kind of message or some words on how to keep a positive outlook in the face of these frustrations?
I think there are many people in Europe who are essentially humanitarian in their instincts and don't like the way some political parties are exploiting the refugee situation against refugees. So I think what we've got to do is to appeal to the humanitarian instincts which are there in all European countries, in some more than in others. And I think what we've got to say is that Europe as a whole has had a decent tradition about accepting asylum seekers and refugees. And I think we have to go back to that tradition. We have to encourage all European countries to agree that hostility towards our fellow human beings of that sort isn't much good. Let me tell you a little story. I was in Jordan some 2 years ago, a large refugee camp called Zaatari, which has about 70,000 people in it. It's better than Calais, for example, where I was 3 weeks ago. Calais is awful. But even Zaatari, which has physically prefab buildings, it has water and electricity and sanitation. But even there, I was talking to a Syrian boy, and he had just completed his education in the camp. That's good. He'd been trying to get a job in the camp. He couldn't. He'd been trying to get a job outside the camp, and he couldn't. Understandably, because Jordan has taken many, many, many refugees. And he more or less said to me, "What hope is there?" And I think the key thing is this: that many of our that I understand that human beings can put up with pretty bad physical conditions if there is some hope for them at the end of the line. But where there is no hope, then that leads to despair, and that is awful. And I think our job, those of us that are working with refugees and campaigning on behalf of refugees, our job is to give them some hope and to give them a feeling that they're going to be welcomed in our local communities across Europe, and that we want them to be active members of our communities and make a positive contribution. And policies like not letting them work, say in the UK, is counterproductive and is totally discriminatory against people whose main wish when they come, say, to the UK is to either continue their education, or if they're older than that, to actually get jobs and make their way. So I think our job is to give hope to people, and we have to mobilize the many people in Europe who are of that instinct, people who don't like the way these policies are going, and who want to make a positive contribution. I think there are many such people, and I'd like to see them have more power if possible. And I think our job is to challenge the politicians who are not supporting this by saying, surely Europe is better than what you wanted, than what you see at the moment. We can do better, and we can show humanity towards our fellow human beings.
Thank you, and I completely agree. We owe it to people with less privileges than us to stay hopeful and to keep up the fight. Of course, you yourself are parliamentarian in the House of Lords, and you interact frequently, I'm sure, with government officials, with politicians from the UK, but also from other countries. So I wanted to say, if you could have one message for them as well, what would you like to ask from them?
What, of politicians or to politicians? Which of politicians?
Of politicians.
Well, I would say this, that we have, certainly in the UK, we have up to now had good adherence to international agreements, to the European Convention on Human Rights, to the 1951 Geneva Convention. These and others are very important human rights instruments, and I think we have to implement them both in the letter and in the spirit of what they are. If we do that, then we will have a better environment in which to welcome asylum seekers and refugees.
Yeah, those conventions and laws exist. We just need to push for them to be implemented. That's true. As a final question, can I ask you, what are your not personal, but what are your plans? What are you working on? What do you hope to be a part of in the near future? Do you have any plans you can share with us?
Well, I think there are a number of issues to do with asylum seekers and refugees, in addition to adherence to international conventions. I think the idea of sending asylum seekers to Rwanda is ridiculous. It's both wrong in principle and it won't work in practice. And it's the government's legislation, which is coming forward from the Commons to the Lords shortly. The government's legislation, I don't believe it will work, and it represents a breach of the rule of law in this country, and it represents a departure from the European Convention on Human Rights and the Geneva Convention. And I think these are deplorable steps for the government to take. So what I want to do is to play whatever part I can in ensuring that we adhere to international human rights conventions, that we do not send people to Rwanda, whether we stop them in the courts or politically. It's got to be stopped. And I would like to feel that we can move towards having a more sympathetic body of public opinion towards asylum seekers and refugees. Now, I don't want to get too party political, because all my efforts on behalf of refugees have tried to get support from across the political spectrum. However, I think maybe if we have a change of government later this year, things might get a bit better. I'm hopeful of that.
Well, we're hopeful also for positive change, regardless of which government. So thank you. And it's great to have people like you on the same page. You bring so much expertise and experience and leadership, which is one of the things that we need on this topic. So we're really lucky to have you supporting our campaign. And of course, we wish you were there on the day of the launch, but we know you're traveling. So thank you so much for agreeing to do this interview remotely. And hopefully we will hear from one another.
Well, all I can say is thank you again for asking me to play a part in this. And thank you for your campaign, which is important. I wish you all possible success in the campaign, and I'll help you in any way I can. Thank you.
Thank you so much.